This was kind of the groundbreaking part of the internet. How can we make a difference? How can we make an impact at these corporations? That's really what corporate venture capital is.
Hey guys, welcome back to our new episode. We're Nora and Lee, and we're the hosts of MPods, the podcast where we sit down and talk with the great minds that emerged from the University of Michigan. So today we're really happy to have David Horowitz, the founder and CEO of Touchdown Ventures, which manage venture capital funds in partnership with major corporations like Kellogg, T-Mobile. Before Touchdown, I know, David, you spent 15 years Comcast Ventures there, worked as a founding partner and managing director. You managed investments in a lot of successful companies across various sectors, and you also co-founded the Genacast Ventures, and you have experience in investment banking from your early career stage at Bear Stearns too. You told us you're also interested in the board game, which I believe you'll talk more about this later. And did graduate from Michigan Ross School of Business in 1998. You are now a new faculty of Ross. You'll be teaching a class about venture capital next year, starting in January. So go blue.
Well, so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to chat with both of you. And, it's interesting. My career started at Michigan and graduated, as you mentioned, 98. And now it's continuing as I'm going on faculty starting in January, as mentioned. So it's really exciting to continue to be part of the Michigan community.
Yeah, for sure. Wonder to start with, if you can tell us a little bit more about things that we didn't mention about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So, I think you went through my background well, but been in venture capital for about 25 years. And, now what I'm doing is I started a firm. It's called Touchdown Ventures. We started it about 9 years ago, back in 2014. And what we do is a little bit different than other venture capital firms. So all the capital that we're investing is coming from corporations. And we're really working with those companies and their management teams to really do venture capital, which is to find startup companies that corporation can invest in. But we're really thinking more broadly beyond the investment piece and thinking about just innovation broadly. How can we make a difference? How can we make an impact at these corporations? That's really what corporate venture capital is. So I'm one of the three founders of the firm, also the CEO, which means I wear a lot of hats. I'm involved in everything from helping to bring in new corporate partners, managing those relationships, managing investments. And I also do a lot of some of the operational functions, of the company, including being the firm's kind of, CFO and finance department.
Yeah, so actually, we are really curious about your early career because you're a venture capital right now. But we're really curious. Have you thought you will be a venture capitalist when you're in college? Because we're all college students and we really care about our future career, and we are really interested in venture capital now. But we're curious, did you imagine that you will be a venture capitalist during your college time?
Yeah, I mean, it was a different world back in the 1990s. What venture capital wasn't as mainstream, it wasn't as popular. So there weren't many classes. The class that I'm teaching that didn't really exist, at least in my recollection, in the 1990s. This is all relatively new. So, the big careers that people were going into at the time were investment banking, consulting, and maybe in industries, accounting was also popular. A little bit entrepreneurship, but I would say that was a small percentage of what the students were interested in at the time. So I went into investment banking. I think it's a great place to start your career. You learn a lot about capital markets, fundraising, mergers and acquisitions, which are really important fundamentals if you want to do something in a venture capital, private equity, really anything in the investment world. So I do recommend that as a good, especially if you're not sure what you want to do, or maybe you think you want to do investing, this could be a great place to build some more skills and experience and help you position yourself to be an investor, which is effectively what happened to me. So after 2 years in investment banking, I decided I wanted to move to the investment side. And I was looking at both private equity and venture capital, but I kind of ended up really liking venture capital better. I like the idea of helping to grow companies and getting involved at the earlier stages and working with serial entrepreneurs. and had an opportunity to do it in a big company environment. And that was something that, really appealed to me in terms of not only getting that venture capital experience, but doing it as part of a large company where not only can I make investments, but maybe I can leverage some of the, whether it's the capital or resources of the big company. And that, in this case, it was Comcast. As you mentioned, that's kind of where I started my venture career after investment banking. And, it was in the right place at the right time. And I helped be on the founding team for the Comcast Corporate Venture Fund. And that was, in right around the 2000 time period when I was there.
Yeah, actually, I'm on the same track with you. I interned in investment banking both my sophomore year and junior year. So maybe we have the same path with you. But I'm curious, how do you transfer your skills learning in investment banking to your later venture capital area? As far as I know, like I have been in M&A group. So in M&A, we will get in touch with some early stage companies and do like acquisition with them. But do you have any real example that you can transfer your skills in investment banking to the later stage VC career?
Yeah, I think the skills are very transferable. I think to be able to be good in investment banking, you need to be very fluent at financial models. You need to be able to understand a business, how to value a business. And at the end of the day, those are the same skills that you need to be successful in venture capital. There's probably two schools of venture capital. There's some venture capitalists who don't put a lot of effort into the financial analysis, and then there's some that do. Like anything, there's no right or wrong answer. As you can imagine, I was a finance major. I'm not out to teach finance. I was investment banking. My bias is going to be that it's really important. But like I said, there are a couple of schools of thought of this. So I think when we're looking at hiring people at Touchdown, I mean, we don't just hire from investment banking, but we find that background to be very interesting. But we've hired people from consulting or industry. We've had people that have found careers in venture capital. So I think the bottom line also is there isn't one specific career path to get into venture capital. I think that a lot of my advice that I'll give on this podcast is, frankly, try a few different things, especially when you're this young in your career. This is a good time to try things. As you get later on in your career, it might be harder. People are going to look at what your experience has been, and that's going to shape what you're going to do next, as opposed to now where it's still a little bit more of a clean slate.
That really impressed me. Like, I think I'm totally on this track. But I'm curious, do you have any pivot time that can make you decide, oh, I want to do VC right now?
I mean, when I was working in the investment bank, we ended up taking a lot of companies public. I was in the investment bank from 98 to 2000. That might be, depending on, I don't know what your age is, you may or may not have remembered that period of time, but that was a very active time when, the internet was starting to form. There were a lot of these .com companies that were going public. So it was a very active area, and venture capitalists were having a lot of success. And so that you had to kind of be there in the moment, seeing the level of activity, the number of new ideas. I mean, we're talking about the beginning of the internet. This is before Google and before PayPal. And think of all the tools we use every day, before Airbnb, before Uber. This was kind of the groundbreaking part of the internet, which has changed our lives. We use it every day. And I was at the beginning of that, seeing some of the early companies that were going public or raising financings or getting acquired. And that's part of why, like, wow, I'm at the ground floor of something, a big trend of society and business. And that was what motivated me to go into venture capital, to kind of continue to be part of that. And that, that's effectively what I've been doing for the last almost 25 years.
Yeah, actually, we were born in 2001. I think it's the year you mentioned, like early.
You wouldn't have remembered it, but you probably have read about it. I mean, you were born after, but there was I remember actually 1994, I was a freshman in Michigan. And at that particular time, the web browser was just coming out. And in the basement of my dorm, Alice Lloyd Hall, which was my dorm, they had a couple, some people had computers, but it wasn't as obviously everybody has a computer today. Again, we're talking about almost over, 30 years ago, whatever it's been, almost 30 years ago. And the first time ever, because Michigan as a university had access to some of this before, I found the Mosaic browser, and it was life changing. The fact that you could go online and get all this information through Yahoo or Alta Vista. There were some crazy search engines that I don't think exist anymore. Go.com. Again, this is before Google. You kind of had to be there in that moment. It was a life-changing experience. We all take for granted that this stuff just existed forever. But when I was growing up, I didn't have a cell phone any of my 4 years in Michigan. We had regular phones. We did have email, but we didn't have. That was like when email was starting to get popular, and the internet, as I mentioned, was starting in venture capital. Was in a very early point of this technology revolution, the internet revolution. Very exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely a tremendous change in the technology and the VC industry too. I wonder, back in 1998, you graduated from Michigan, you joined the investment banking. How did people work in investment banking at that time? How is the work different from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, there wasn't Zoom, so everything was really done in person. And we created these massive books that took a lot of effort and time to create and edit and make good, and wasted a lot of paper. So I don't think we were very environmentally conscious, but a lot of it was going and presenting ideas, whether it was potential acquisition targets or showing the companies that we thought could go public, why they could go public. So the content was probably similar, but just the medium that we had to deliver it, there was a very much in-person culture that may have changed because of things like the COVID pandemic. And it was just less information. A lot of the information you'd have to get from specific sources. We relied a lot on, and still to some extent you do. We had great equity research analysts that covered public companies or covered private companies, and they had access to some of the best information, largely by talking and developing their own point of views. But there wasn't a place online where you could go necessarily find all that information. You had to go talk to people.
Absolutely. I think moving on for your current positions and the Touchdown Ventures that you were working on, I wonder what is the story behind the funding of Touchdown Ventures. I know you work in Comcast Ventures for 15 years. That might be related to this experience, but willing to know more about the story behind it.
Yeah, I saw how successful the corporate venture was at Comcast. And we made a lot of money for Comcast, but two, more importantly, we drove a lot of impact. Impact's a word we like to use at Touchdown, which is really to have a meaningful effect. And for a company like Comcast, which is a Fortune 100 company, to really make an impact, you have to do a lot because it's such a big company to impact and to have a dent in the revenue or product. And so I think it shows you that we did that multiple times. There were multiple new businesses that Comcast started that had ties to our venture capital portfolio. Comcast acquired a number of the companies that we had either invested in or had evaluated. And so after doing that for a long time, I just had this thesis that said, every big company should really be doing this. I don't think they're that different than Comcast, which is if you're interested in innovation and thinking about corporate growth, these activities I prove that can help you do that. And if you think about this, let's just call it Fortune 500. And if you think every Fortune 500 company is going to have a corporate venture fund, we think a firm like Touchdown, who can help them professionally set up the strategy, build the investment thesis, and help professionally manage it, can be a big business. And that was the thesis I had. And I started the firm with, two other folks who have been working with me. And then we've obviously grown the team. So today I think it's somewhere 50 plus professionals on the team. So we really built this up to be, pretty large firm in the scheme of corporate venture capital. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that definitely answers the questions. I think all of your past experience in investment banking and venture capital experience definitely helped you to fund the Touchdown Ventures. And you mentioned Touchdown Ventures is a cooperative venture capital firm, which means like you guys collaborate with other institutions like T-Mobile and Kellogg, things that you mentioned, to help them set up the investment strategies and make the investments. So I wonder, what is the difference, in your opinion, between CVC and the traditional VCs?
Yeah, there's a number of differences. So the traditional VC usually has a lot of investors. They're pooling their capital into a vehicle. And there's really only one objective, and that's to make money. There's really no other objective. How can we make the most money possible? And
Mhm.
for a corporate VC, it's pretty different. So instead of pooling the capital, it's just the corporation's money. So that's, they're the only investor in their own venture fund. It's all their money. And there might be other objectives, making money is one objective, but even going back to what I mentioned with Comcast, there are other objectives like thinking about the innovation or thinking about new businesses that the corporation could start or acquisitions. So it's sort of a double bottom line or double impact type of where we wanted to make money like a traditional VC, but we're thinking about this other value that the corporation can get out of this activity. And if you think about
Mhm.
it, for a lot of these corporations, let's just say, a lot of them end up doing about 50 or $100 million of venture capital investments. And let's say you're able to double or triple that, which would be very good. That's going to generate maybe 100, $200 million of profits. And if you're talking about a company that's 10, 50, $100 billion revenue, that's not that meaningful. At the same time, nobody wants to lose money because you don't want a situation where so it's hard to move the needle on just the financial return in the corporate VC, but you can move if you can help the corporation that's doing billions of dollars in revenue think about new billions of dollars of revenue, that starts moving the needle. And that's the type of activity that a corporate venture fund needs to do. But it also needs to make money, because if it's losing money, then at some point, whether it's the CEO or the CFO, we're going to say, why are we doing this? It's money loser. Let's kill this. And that has happened before. And that's just part of, but that's part of.
Wonder, what are the key qualities or characteristics of doing a CVC, and like how do you make touch-on ventures that really differentiate it from other CVCs?
Well, we're pretty unique because most of the other CVCs are trying to what I would call do it themselves. So they're hiring their own people. A lot of times they're taking people that are new to venture capital, may have never made investments before, which could generate, can be a lot of risk. And so our real model is those people should be involved, but they should be working with a firm like us that has experience, has, a lot of the venture capital experience that could round out. So our competition is really not another company, but really that the corporation, instead of partnering with us, is going to maybe do corporate venture capital with either hiring experienced people or using inexperienced people. The former is fine, but the latter is probably a mistake. So that's what we're really usually pitching against or selling against. And obviously, sometimes we're successful and sometimes we're not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's awesome. I'll do more research on that. And I wonder, on the opposite of that, could you share the time you feel you didn't make a good investment, or maybe some of the mistakes that you made in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I feel like without naming names, where I've made mistakes in the past, I think usually it's when you rush things and there's a timeline. If you don't make a decision by this timeline, you're not going to get in the deal. So there's a little bit of fear of missing out and FOMO. And you learn from that and you kind of say, we've got to do our due diligence process. We like to be thorough. We like to do our full financial analysis. We like to do our due diligence. And if it doesn't work for the company, we may miss the deal. There are so many venture capital deals out there, and every investor should have their own process, their own due diligence. And just because we think it's a great company. So that's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned, which is we should dictate the process. We need to do our work. We need to do our references. We need to build our financial models. And that just takes time. You can't just do all of that in a day or two. And I tell the team, it's okay. It's a little bit of don't fall in love with the company. Fall in love with the company after you've invested. not before you've invested, because you may not get into the company before because their timeline, or you might come up with something in your diligence process that leads you to believe it's not a good investment. And in that case, you need to think about not moving forward with that company.
A few weeks ago, you guys are hiring the cohort from the college students that kind of shadowing all the investment due diligence process, and giving more opportunities to the students. I think that was a really good opportunity for us at a very young early stage to learn about CVC from hands-on experience. And another question that I had for you is, now you're a CEO and partner of a venture capital firm. How do you spare your time? How do you allocate your time in the daily life? How much time you spend reviewing the deals, doing the due diligence, and something like networking?
Yeah, I mean, my role is a little bit different than the average person at Touchdown because, as you mentioned, I'm the CEO, which means I'm really helping to run the firm. And that means that I have a lot of operational responsibilities that a lot of other people at Touchdown don't have. So I'm a little bit less active on doing the pitches with the startups and doing some of the due diligence. I'm more involved in working with our teams, helping to challenge some of the assumptions that they've made. I'm on the investment committees of some of the funds. I'm more involved in things like deal structuring, portfolio management. Where I'm spending a lot of my time is really helping to build Touchdown. So how do we grow Touchdown? How do we add more corporates on our platform? How do we hire great people? How do we train them? Training is a very big part of our culture, which is why we do things like the Touchdown Ventures college program. Recruiting is a big part, because if you're going to build a firm like this, we need to keep attracting and retaining talent. So I spend a lot of time there. And then I just have a lot of administrative responsibilities, for example, like HR and finance in particular, both report into me. And so and legal and compliance. So I tend to spend a lot of time focusing on some of those areas as well.
A follow-up question on that is how much time you spend on the actual deal. Do you have to be in the process of the deal sourcing and due diligence, or you just be on the e-board meeting, kind of make the final decisions?
I support the teams with everything. So, but on the sourcing, as I'm talking to other venture investors, or if the teams have identified that I might be able to help, I get them access to a deal that they're interested in, I get involved in that. Same with due diligence, if I have relationships or if I have a perspective. But I would say I'm more of a supporter on those two, as opposed to, that's not my responsibility. Everyone at Touchdown has their responsibilities. We have people, like analysts and associates and senior associates and principals who, for the most part, are taking on a lot of those responsibilities. And my job is more to support them, to supervise them. And I'm a lot more hands-on, as I mentioned, in things like deal structuring, which is one area that I think I'm very good at, and more involved in things like approving the investments of the investment committee. And then, I'm also better used on the portfolio support side, where now we have the investment and we're really trying to supercharge that value. And that's where myself and others who have good, connections and Rolodexes can really help bring that to bear to the startup, and give that startup an advantage, not having that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure all the folks are doing a great job under your arm. And I think moving forward, talking about the future, how do you think about the future trends in different industries? And I know technology and AI is definitely a big thing right now, but talking with a lot of investors, they think there's more bubbles than the actual values. What do you think the next trend will be, and which areas Touchdown Ventures will focus on in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still early on this AI revolution. Like I said, we've been involved with it. We had some success with the case text investment that I referenced. I think a lot of the innovation has been in more horizontal platforms, meaning they touch a lot of industries, like an open AI. And we think the next generation of AI are going to be things like case text that focus on specific industries, solve particular industry problems. And so we tend to think more about, and I'd put that category in general of vertical software, of software that is solving particular industry challenges that a particular industry has. So those are some of the areas I would say, but that cuts across lots of sectors. And we go through each sector. There's certain themes that we are spending more time on. Like we see in, the built world space that electric vehicles, there's going to be a big transition there. And we think that's a trend where the percentage of people that own electric vehicles is very small, and that's going to get very large. And that's certainly a market that is ripe for innovation and disruption and opportunity. So that's a great example that we're focused on. We think there's a lot of investment opportunities in the infrastructure space at large. How do you improve, whether it's automation or security or other things at major infrastructure, power plants, roads, bridges, tunnels, things like that. It's just another area we've been thinking about. Healthcare, again, that's an area where we're bullish on AI affecting healthcare, making better clinical decisions, discovering drugs, analyzing patient data. There's all different area, and these are things that never would have been possible before some of these new technology changes that have happened over the past 6 to 12 to 24 months that are all brand new going into these industries. So I'm excited about, I think we're going to see this new wave of new innovation coming from entrepreneurs, but I do think it's going to be very vertically focused, and that's where we want to, that's a lot of where Touchdown is, and that makes sense for us given we're working with these big corporations who care about solving their industry vertical problems. So obviously that's kind of on point for us as a firm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. That will add a lot of additional values. And talking about your classes next year in Ross, you'll be teaching the venture capital class starting in January. So could you talk a little bit more about the topic of the classes, and maybe for students who are interested in taking the class, what things they should notice?
Sure. It's Finance 430. The title is Entrepreneurial Finance, an existing class that has been taught previously. I'm just taking over from the professor that left U of M recently. While the title is Entrepreneurial Finance, I would say it really is like a VC 101 or Principles of Venture Capital curriculum. So we're going to think about everything from how do you build a venture capital strategy? How do you raise money as a venture capital fund? How do you go about sourcing opportunities? How do you evaluate opportunities? So I'm taking the approach, there'll definitely be a lecture component to what I'm doing, but there's going to be a very big experience component where the students in the class will have the opportunity to almost act like they're real venture capitalists through this class. So I think that'll be well received, I believe. And it's a capstone class for folks at the undergrads in Ross. So I'm not sure who that is eligible for. I think only people that are enrolled in Ross, but again, I'm still new to that, but it's just for seniors as a capstone.
Gotcha. That sounds really exciting, especially given that you have a lot of industry experience and working experience come back to teach. I'm sure the students who take this class will learn a lot from you and the class.
Yeah,
I think
I'm hoping that they'll learn about it, but will be a good opportunity for them to figure out whether this is the type of career that they want to do or not. The best thing might be to say, okay, I took David Horowitz's Fin 430 class, and now I want to be a VC. And the second best thing is I took it and I realized I don't want it, and that's okay, because then that will help the student figure out, where they want to go, because maybe they said that they did want to be venture capital and they realize it's not for them, and that's okay too. So, but hopefully they'll, either way through this, by the end of the class, we'll form a point of view of whether they think it's a good career path for them or not. That certainly would be part of the goal, in addition to learning about the industry.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think especially for senior students, a lot of them maybe got return offers like from investment banking or like other firms. But after that, I believe a lot of students are very confused. What's the next step for investment banking, or what's the next step for a consulting firm? Some might go to have their startups, or some go to VC. So I think it's really reasonable for them to set a course at senior year to give students a better insight. Oh, what is actually VC and what it will do here, and what is after investment banking. So I believe that if we got a chance, we will also audit the class and maybe engage with some like capstones. And I think for the last part of the podcast, we are seeking some advice for current students. Yeah, so first, it's more student related. How do we usually suggest students to follow up with the current trend in venture capital?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think it's early for the student to necessarily have to decide what industry they want to focus on. If they certainly have a passion for healthcare or climate tech or finance tech, they're welcome to do that. But I also want to make it clear that I didn't know that I was going to go into, media and technology, which I did for a lot of my career until after I left Michigan. So I don't think anybody needs to worry about that. But to answer your question, I think there are certainly industry publications and blogs that focus on those industries, seeing which deals are getting done, what's happening in the public markets, maybe trying to build relationships with some of the venture firms that make investments in those industries. I think those are all good suggestions, but I do want to emphasize, I don't think the expectation would be that anybody needs to figure out at this point in their career, if they're still an undergraduate student or even a graduate student for that matter, of where they want to do in specialization.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good advice. And the
Yep.
last question is, what do you wish you know in our shoes?
It's a good question. I mean, I only have positive things to say about my experience in Michigan. I think I learned a lot of really good skills, especially on the accounting and finance side, that have kind of led me to where I am, and the quality of the education, the quality of the classmates. I guess I have probably not stayed as in close contact with some of my people that I graduated with, and I think that business and success, there is a tie to network, and so that's one thing I regret doing if I could go back in time, which is trying to stay in touch with some of the people, which is not always easy, but there are a number of people I do still stay in touch with, but probably not at the level that I would like, because I think that the nice thing about the Michigan community is people want to help other Michigan alum, and they want to, and sometimes you have to call in a favor or ask for help on something, and that's where if you can first connect with the people that you went to school with, that graduated in your class or you took classes with, that know you, that's going to be easier than reaching out to a strange alumnus. Although I would say that a lot of the strange alumnus that I have reached out to, do respond and are willing to take the time, but it's easier to get a response from the people that you were friends with. So staying in touch with them, that's my best advice.
Yeah, it's really funny that you mentioned this thing, in touch with people who also graduated from Michigan. I feel exactly the same way, even if I haven't graduated. But the more I moved towards my senior year and realized, oh my God, I only have a few months left in Michigan. I wanted to spend more time with my friends and kind of know more people and things I haven't explored before. And another reason that we started this podcast is to enable people who graduated from Michigan maybe from a long time ago and kind of hear back about voices from their classmates back in 20 years, 30 years ago. So later on, we do plan to start a group chat where we'll include all the podcast guests who came to the podcast in that group chat, so you guys can reconnect with each other, and maybe there will be some synergies created from the group chat, and we're really looking forward to that. I guess the last part for this podcast is about some fun facts about yourself. I'm sure this is the most exciting part. You mentioned that in another podcast, you created a board game during the pandemic time. So wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that. Why are you interested in the board game? How did you create that? And how much time you spend with that?
Yeah, it was actually an idea I came up with a long time ago, I think over 15 years ago. And I used to fly a lot before the pandemic. I started to fly again a little bit more since the pandemic's kind of, not gone away, but been less of the lockdowns have gone away at least. And I just love this idea of collecting frequent flyer miles. It was like, this is a game, this is fun. I used to think about all the bonuses I could earn if I, fly this route, or if I take this number of flights this month. I love that stuff. And then the light bulb went off. I was like, this really should be a board game, because this is fun and board games are fun. So I created the first version of it a long time ago, kind of sat on my shelf. And then my kids are now high school age, but when they were younger, I took it out of the shelf. I had them play it. They liked it. Their friends liked it. So started to get a little bit more inspired about maybe turning it into something. And then when COVID happened and no one was flying, and people were sitting at home playing games. It was the right time to take it. It was a little later. It took me about a year from saying I was going to do it. I had to hire a graphic designer and file trademarks and intellectual property and hire a manufacturer and get it on Amazon, and all these things take time. But I launched it about 2 years ago. It's out. It's gotten some great press and write-ups, and it's just a fun side project. I'm not currently looking to do another game yet, but maybe I will. You never know where life's going to take you. But it was less about like, this is going to be a big business, and more, I had this vision and I wanted to see it through, and wanted to show a good example. If you have an idea, don't just keep it in the closet. Go try to pursue it. So that's what I did. So
Yeah, absolutely.
the game's a board game about. We don't have an international version yet, but it's about traveling around the US, earning frequent flyer. It's a fun, I would say, kind of family game, although there's no reason why two college students couldn't play it and have fun. I mean, it's a game for all ages, but it was definitely originally designed as a game you'd play with your family.
That's super nice. I'm sure I'll buy it. I like flying and I like to play Monopoly. That's kind of like a flying game too, but I'm sure I'll try yours. And it's amazing you turn your habits to a small business, even if you don't want to extend it bigger, but that's a really vivid of doing entrepreneurship.
Yeah, Amazon is such a key part of the economy, and I had to learn how to use Amazon and still use it. So if anything, the education of how to work with Amazon, I mean, you could read a book of how to work with Amazon, but there's no experience like having your own product on Amazon. So you understand, how do you send inventory, and how do things get sold on Amazon, and how reviews work, and all the other things that are part of their platform. I'm still not an expert, but I know a lot more than the average person because I've had to experience it with this board game company.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Entrepreneurship cannot be taught in school and on the textbook, only if you do it and by learning it through experience. Wonder what's your favorite place in U of M, even if that's a long time ago. Maybe your memory is a little bit blurry.
Favorite place to visit, or favorite place to? Well, I mean, I love sports, so it's hard to compete with a Saturday afternoon at Michigan Stadium.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe like favorite place to visit whenever you come back.
Good question. I mean, I love just walking in the diag and just feeling it all in and taking a picture. I'll spin the cube. I did that when I was there recently. Sometimes I like just to revisit, my freshman year, I was in Alice Lloyd Hall. So I think it's under construction right now, but I used to walk across the bridge where the CCRB, Central Campus Recreation Building, that I believe is under construction right now. So that literally spent every day doing that. So I do things like that. I like reliving my path. I had 4 wonderful years, so it's fun to see where you lived. I mean, you guys still live there, so it's not, but if you think about yourself 5 or 10 or 20, even 30 years from now, saying, let me go back to where I was 30 years, it's pretty cool. And the Ann Arbor has changed so much. I mean, the number of new buildings and construction, and some of it's like, even the business school was completely different when I was there. And it's none of the building. I think they build all new buildings. So I now know the new business building because I've been there a few times. But my entire life was spent in a different set of buildings that are no longer exist. So that it's a little sad, but happy at the same time that Michigan continues to be fights on leaders and best. So that's what we have to keep doing. So
totally, yeah. I believe Ross School didn't even exist at that time. They just rebuilt it recently, so a lot has changed for sure. I guess my last question is, what is your favorite book, and is there any book like in your life kind of played a life-changing impact or role?
It's a good question. As a team, I read a lot of business books, and I think that's a good way of getting better. So there was a really good book, quick read. Actually, one of my colleagues recommended. I think it's like the 5 Dysfunctions of Team. I think it's a great business book that I would recommend in terms of how a team can work together and how a team can operate. So I really recommend that book. There's a couple of other business books that I would recommend, too numerous to kind of list, and I don't have them off the top of my head, but There's a few good ones in venture capital. I think the other one that I'd recommend, Andreessen Horowitz is Andreessen and Horowitz, and no relation to me. So I've actually met with Horowitz, who's the founder, before, and we kind of quickly realized that we probably are not related, even though we have the same last name. But he has a really good book around scaling startups. Some of it's from his own experience. That's also a good one. I forgot the name of it. I think it's something about hard things. So those are the types of things I'm typically reading when I have spare time.
The hard things about the hard
Hard things about it. Yeah, couldn't remember the exact title.
That's a good book.
Yeah, we'll make sure we post all those book names on the episode notes so other people can see it.
By the way, that I would read is actually, I don't know if they still offer it, but one of the classes I took at Michigan was History of the University of Michigan. I have no idea whether that class still exists or not. But there was a book that I read about it, and it was, I think, to appreciate the university, you need to understand the history. And so I really like that. And I'll give you another fun fact, which if you guys can find, I'm sure I will send you extra copies of my board game. Fun fact, I created back in 1996 or 97, I can't remember the exact time, the first website on the history of the University of Michigan. I did it under my unique name, which is DBH, which is still my unique name. And I've searched everywhere for this because it's not like you could just take a website with you when you leave and kind of, I assume that it would forever be in and when I've been on campus, I've inquired on it, but I spent hours. Granted, it was probably the most rudimentary website, but we're talking about before you guys were born. So it's not going to look pretty, but I do think it was the first website to document the history of the University of Michigan. And I'll give you a challenge. If you guys can find it, we'll come up with some sort of prize, but I can't find it. But that is you asked books, and then I thought about that, and then I figured that's a cool fun fact that I created the first history of the University of Michigan website. So
that's awesome. I'm sure that class is not offered now, but I'll find that website. Maybe that's a good area to study about the history of Michigan.
Yeah, they used to be able to type in, umich.edu / probably your unique name, and then if you publish any web materials, it would come up. And I don't think they do that anymore, probably for many reasons. But that's where my website was, and who the hell knows where it is right now. It may have been deleted by, again, we're talking almost 30 years ago or 25 years ago. So it may be shredded into, but that's disappointing. But anyway.
It's funny. I'll find some clue.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really good to do this, and hopefully I'll get to meet both of you when I'm on campus starting next calendar year.
Go Blue. Thank you, David.
All right, see you. Thanks.
Bye.